Welcome back to another episode of ACT TV. I am so excited to be back because today we're talking about a topic that I absolutely love, and that is housing. We have an amazingly terrible housing crisis in New Zealand, and I'm getting so much correspondence from people who are just asking, is there a party that has solutions to this housing crisis? And I'm happy to announce that we do have a lot of policies to make sure that we can actually create an environment for investment and development so that every hardworking Kiwi can actually own their own home. And if you'd like to head along to the ACT Party's website and look at our specific housing policies, they're on the website under campaigns. There's a lot of material. And if you want to give us feedback on any of those policies, please do so. But tonight is a special episode about property investment, tenants and landlords. And we know under this COVID crisis, there is a whole range of different industry groups that have been affected. Landlords and tenants, of course, have been affected too. So I'm really happy that we have a really special guest on tonight to help talk through that. But before I bring on our guest, I wanted to run through a few of the issues of today. So today, the ACT Party came out strongly on two housing issues. The first is interest deductibility. Now, if you remember back to the beginning of the year, the government said that they were going to change the rules and put in a new housing tax for landlords called interest limitation rules. It was extremely divisive. And what it said was anybody from the 27th of March, if you had a new build home, you could be exempt to still claim your interest on your home. However, if you had anything that was older stock, from the 1st of October, you were no longer able to do so. And we put up a petition at the time. The ACT Party put up a petition saying we wanted to stop this going through because the Labour Party said it was going to tilt the market towards first home buyers. It's absolutely rubbish. This change is not going to tilt the market towards first home buyers because you know that from the government's own Treasury advice from its officials that it received, it said that this wouldn't actually solve the problem. Building more homes will solve the problem. But in the meantime, what has the government done? They've blamed the housing crisis on a group of people who are mum and dad landlords who own one or two rental properties. And we know that this is coming into force very shortly on the 1st of October. And so the ACT Party says, let's scrap this tax. Ultimately, the government is just looking to grab $800 million of revenue every single year off a group of people because it wants a cash grab. Won't do anything to solve the housing market. The second policy that we picked up today is healthy home standards. And this is for people who have been affected through the COVID crisis, who are landlords. So on the 1st of July, any landlord that had a home that was under a new tenancy or a renewed tenancy had to get their homes up to healthy home standards within 90 days. Now, that's extremely hard if you're now being plunged into a level 4 lockdown. You can't get your tradespeople and your builders in to bring your homes up to those standards. So we're looking for certainty because I think it's extremely unfair that people could be breaking the law through no fault of their own. The government hasn't sought to rectify this proactively, so we're campaigning for you, asking for the government to make the rules clear so people actually know what's happening. But it is my privilege to bring on our special guest. So today we're joined by Andrew King, and he is the president of the Property Investors Federation. Hey, Andrew, thanks for being here. Oh no, I've lost your sound.
There we go. How's that?
Much better, thank goodness.
Sorry, my fault.
So how are you, Andrew? You stuck in the lockdown?
I am stuck in the lockdown, unfortunately. So yeah, we're up in Auckland. I think, like most Aucklanders, we're resigned to this. I think it was the only thing that could have happened, but it is a shame that we've been put in this position, and the rest of the country is suffering as well, of course, because of lack of supplies and things getting through Auckland. So yeah, it's a shame for everyone.
It is. And, my thoughts do go out to people now entering another week of lockdown. And I sincerely hope from the bottom of my heart it is the last week, because there are many people, especially ones with kids at home, who are really starting to get to their wits' end. But if we come back to property, talk to me through what is the Property Investors Federation and how many landlords and tenants are there actually in New Zealand?
Sure. Okay, so the Property Investors Federation, we're actually the umbrella organisation, I suppose, of 17 associations around the country. So we're an industry body, we're not-for-profit groups, and we have, each association around the country has members. So if you're in Invercargill, you can join the Southland Property Investors Association. If you're in Northland, you can join the Northland Property Investors Association, and all the associations in between. And we, as I say, we're an industry group. We get told that we're a lobby group for landlords at times, but we prefer to think of ourselves as being an industry group because we look at what the needs of tenants as well. Tenants are our customers and extremely important to our industry. So we want to make sure that anything that we're lobbying for actually has the needs and the wants of the tenants as well. So we have meetings for our members usually every month around the country. And it's a great opportunity for people to meet with other like-minded investors and not feel that, you're somehow bad for being a rental property provider. In fact, you can be quite proud to be a rental property provider, and you can share your information and what you're doing with other people. And through sharing information, we all sort of grow. So it's a great not-for-profit way of helping people to be more professional and more profitable in their rental property endeavours.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the meetings, because I've been along to a few based up in Auckland and met some wonderful people there. And I was kind of surprised by the number of people I met who told me that they actually keep their rentals below market rates.
Yeah, it's something we've kind of known for quite a long time, actually. But we did a survey of our members earlier this year, and we found that in fact 70% actually have their rental property prices below market levels. And I think it's because it's as an owner manager, especially, property managers don't tend to do it so much. But as an owner manager, you do have quite a personal rapport with your tenants, and it's quite a close thing. And you do want to try and keep the rents low for your tenants because you feel there's some responsibility for them. It's a different sort of a thing. I think we're portrayed as being, money hungry and putting up rents at the drop of a hat and kicking tenants out, but that just isn't the case. We definitely think of our tenants as customers, and we want to provide them with a good home at a reasonable price.
Yeah, no, that's true. And one of the things that really struck me when I put up this petition on behalf of ACT saying, let's hold off on these interest deductibility changes or these new housing tax changes. And I had, emails flooding in, and there were people who were tenants who were saying, look, I don't want this to go ahead because I actually have a relationship with my landlord. And I know that if they can't afford to keep my rent at this price, they're going to have to either put up my rent or sell the property, and that doesn't make me happy either. And so, how many stories are there out there of people who are actually drastically affected by this change?
Oh, look, the vast majority are going to be affected. Again, in our survey, we found that 90% of rental property owners are going to be affected by this. So most of them have loans on their properties, and if you've got a loan and you can no longer claim the mortgage interest as a quite legitimate tax deduction, then it is going to affect you. You are going to pay more tax for it. And as the people that you've been talking to quite rightly know, that there's only two things that can happen here. Either you sell the property or the rental prices go up. I mean, you can take a lower profit or lower profit margin, but we're actually already squeezed. And a lot of people, as we've already talked about, a lot of people already have their rental prices at below market levels. And so increasing the rent is the most likely thing that's going to happen. In fact, we found out through our survey that I think it was nearly 20% were looking to sell some or all of their rental properties. The majority of them were actually only going to sell some. It was to try and get rid of the debt to get around the increased tax. But the vast majority, something like 75%, were going to look to increase the rents over the next few years in order to compensate for this. And I think that's why one of the activities that we've actually undertaken with the Property Investors Federation was to go out to the tenant groups and find out what they thought, and also to first home buyers groups. They're the ones who the government says that they're actually doing this for. But what we found is that when we were talking to the people at the first home buyers group, is that they weren't actually happy with this change either, because they could see that, or they knew that the first home buyer is a tenant before they're a first home buyer. And they knew that saving the deposit is one of the hardest things for people to get into home ownership. And the rents, and they could see that the rents are going to increase, and that makes it harder for them to save a deposit, harder for them to get into their first home. And the tenant groups were the same. They also said that, it didn't make sense. It wasn't going to improve the life of the tenant or the living quality of tenants. All it could do was increase rents and make it harder for people to be able to afford other things, because they're spending more money on rents. So it really didn't do anybody any good, which is why we actually wrote a letter to government, to the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, and it was signed not just by us or written by us, but it was written by us, Tenants Protection in Canterbury, and the First Home Buyers Group, asking them to reconsider this and not introduce it. So I thought it was really powerful that you had not only, people just say, oh, you'd expect us to be against this, but given that tenants are against it and first home buyers are against it as well, we thought it was pretty powerful. We're pretty disappointed that we didn't get anywhere with that, unfortunately.
Well, is it really unexpected that the government might not listen? We've been seeing so many different interest groups have new rules and regulations put on them with no form of consultation. But I think it's really interesting. Why do you think the government actually decided to go ahead with this rule change? Because, they have the greatest intention, wanting first home buyers to be able to have access to homes. I think everybody wants that. But even the advice that they had showed that this wasn't going to do anything to solve the problem. So from your perspective, do you know why they decided to go ahead with it?
Not really. The information that we were given was that they wanted to disincentivize people having investment property and potentially move it from private ownership of rental property towards state ownership of rental property. That was one thing. And also they thought that we were in competition with first home buyers, and therefore, if we got rid of us, then that would make it easier for first home buyers, be less competition, and it would stop house prices going up. But as you say, it was never going to work. I think they've been trying now for quite a few years to paint us as being the problem with house price growth and all house problems in New Zealand. And so they have introduced things like the ring fencing, like increasing the bright line test, and now the interest deductibility. It seems that they think this will, by hurting us, they're going to fix these problems, but they keep hurting us and the problems are still there. So I think they need to rethink just what the problem is actually that they're trying to fix.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. In some ways, it kind of feels a little bit like stubbornness. And in my view, it's a bit like, they recognize that there was a problem. People were getting really angsty that we needed to look like we're busy and doing something. And what better way than to find a group of people and blame the whole problem on them? I think it's a little bit of scapegoating. But I'm really interested if we look at, all the rules and regulations that have been put on landlords over the last few years, walk me through how hard it actually is to be a landlord now? How many rules do people actually have to sign up to just to provide somebody accommodation?
Oh, it's definitely getting much, much harder. I mean, they have said that they are looking to disincentivize people from providing rental property. And I just don't think they've thought about the housing market in its totality, and that people do need accommodation and tenants need accommodation. And at the moment, we provide around 85% of all rental properties in New Zealand. And so therefore we are a huge part in supplying homes for people, and that's what we want. So we've got no problems with things like, well, we've got some problems actually with things like the healthy homes, but it's only technical things. We basically don't mind if there are regulations that improve the quality of life for tenants. Like we supported compulsory insulation, we supported compulsory smoke alarms because they were actually good for the safety and the well-being of tenants. So we've got no problems with things like that. But it's when they start introducing things which have no benefit for tenants but are purely there to dissuade us from actually providing rental properties, or making it more expensive or difficult for us to do it. So things like ring fencing, where any company who makes a loss, any investment which makes a loss, if you've got some income tax that you're paying on some other income, you can use that loss to offset the tax that you pay on this other form of income, except for rental property. We are the exception now, so you can't do that. So, and one of the aspects, I suppose, about rental property is that it's really difficult to buy a rental property and to buy a property and provide it as a rental home. And that's because initially you've usually got a large loan, your expenses are high in the early years, and then over time, as rental prices increase and you can get rid of some of the loan, then you start making money sort of further down the line. But it's very hard in the initial stages. So things like ring fencing make it even harder for you in the early stages. And so it hasn't stopped too many people it hasn't caused them to sell rental properties, but it's made it harder for people to provide new rental properties. And that's what we need more of, because, give tenants more choice. And then there's things like, the big one, though, was the interest deductibility. I mean, that really was a shock. And it's going to have an enormous impact, especially on rents. So that, combined with things like getting rid of 90-day notices, which was mostly used to control antisocial tenants. So we've now got a situation where it's not even a tenant and landlord issue. This is a community issue where it's going to be much harder for us to actually handle and manage antisocial tenants who are causing problems in neighbourhoods. And we're already seeing quite a few headlines of these tenants who are antisocial causing problems. So there's all sorts of things that are not just making it harder for us to provide property, it's actually causing problems for society as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that's that difficulty of knowing that we have more people wanting emergency accommodation, more people living in cars and in motels, and the government at the same time trying to make it harder for people to actually provide their own forms of accommodation. But at the moment, I really want to change tack and just bring in another special guest tonight, another king. This is Dave King. So you may have seen the poll that came out last night, and it showed that on recent numbers, ACT would get 19 MPs in Parliament. So I wanted to bring on number 19, Dave King. And hey, Dave, how do you feel about knowing that you could be in Parliament?
Wow, it feels really amazing, and it's just incredible to see how ACT is going in the polls at the moment. I never thought we would get as far as quick, after the last election. So yeah, it's been fantastic, really fantastic.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic to have you on board here in ACT too, Dave. But I wanted to bring you on today as well because I was talking to you and you mentioned that you had in fact been a landlord, but kind of a former landlord, and that's because of the recent government's regulations. So as a person who's been through this process, seen the effects of what government rules and regulations do. Walk us through a little bit of your story, because I suspect what you have gone through is what a lot of other people will be going through too.
Yes, yeah, exactly. My story is fairly simple. I certainly had a rental property which I've had for a number of years, and I had a number of tenants through it over that time, and it was it was compliant with all the rules that kept changing over time, and it provided an opportunity for people to actually save for a house. I mean, my previous tenants, that was the reason they moved out, is they managed to save up enough money and they managed to buy their own house, a new house, and that was really great. It was never about making money. It was really just about having a nest egg, so to speak, for later years, and that was the thing. It was a double-edged thing where I was able to provide a house for somebody to live in, for families to live in, and again to give myself a little bit of an investment. And yeah, like Andrew was saying, it was never about the rent. The rent was always a little bit on the low side, but we did that really just to get good tenants and to keep good tenants. It's very hard when you've got someone who's very reliable and you don't want to keep putting the rent up on them. If it's covering expenses, that's fine. So that was all great until the government brought in these new regulations, and that's when things changed. I mean, obviously, like a lot of other landlords, I had to talk to my accountant, and he pretty much told me, you can either absorb the extra cost of this, which is, in my case, I think it was going to run between $4,000 and $5,000 a year, or you're going to have to put the rent up between $80 and $100 a week. And it just wasn't viable to do that. I mean, I had a property manager, and I discussed with her, I said, I know we're under the actual market rate, but will it stand this? Will the tenants stand it? And she said, no, it's not going to happen. So unfortunately, I had to make the call that because the loan on that was 100% interest only, it had to go. And that was a hard call to make, a really hard call to make. And I don't think people realise too that in cases like mine, where I had a property manager, not only is it one less house for people to rent, but it's one less for that property manager to manage. That's income away from them, and in a lot of cases away from tradesmen and contractors that they use to maintain these properties. So it's kind of had a big domino effect, and it's not good.
Yeah, and I'm sorry you had to go through that too, because you're absolutely right. It's one less rental for the market when we're already stretched. But you're absolutely right. Everybody is interconnected, and it will have these domino effects. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your story, Dave. And I'm sure I will catch up with you shortly. But at the moment, I just want to flick to questions that we've come through with the time that we've still got left. And I've got a question here. I think it's probably more of a statement, but you can talk to it if you wish to, Andrew. How is interest deductibility a loophole for existing investments, but not for the new investments? If it's a loophole, then it would apply to all.
It's not a loophole. It just isn't. It should never have been described as a loophole. I think calling us speculators and tax avoiders and using loopholes to avoid our tax was misleading. And I think most tax experts have actually come out and supported that and agreed that it wasn't a loophole. It was a genuine tax deduction which is available to any business, really, and it should be available to us as well. The fact that it's okay for a new property as opposed to an old property basically means that they're trying to get us to provide new properties as rentals, and that's to increase. They say anyway that it's to increase the supply of homes around New Zealand. What they don't realise is that you don't actually have to build a new home to help to be part of the system to provide a new home. By a first-time buyer and an investor, by buying an existing home off a first-time buyer, an existing homeowner, it allows them to go and build a new home for themselves somewhere else and upgrade, and that's what tends to happen. So even though we're not actually physically building these new things, we're enabling them to be built, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a second question here, which I think you might find particularly interesting. Can you see Labor implementing rent controls as part of their strategy to drive out mum and dad investors?
Look, I hope not. They have said that they're not going to. I think Phil Twyford, when he was Minister of Housing, categorically said it wouldn't happen because they don't work. Economists around the world have acknowledged that it doesn't work. It merely limits supply. And I think, again, the people who are wanting to hurt property investors have to realize that they're affecting the entire market, and it doesn't achieve what they want to achieve. So just putting rent controls in, all it does is means that people cannot provide more rental properties, and that's what we need. We've got a rental crisis at the moment. We're short of rental properties. We need more, and we need to encourage private provision of rental properties, not discourage it.
Yeah, well, there's nothing there that I can disagree with. I've got a particularly interesting one here that came in from the email last night, and says, can you ask Andrew if he has members who own blocks of flats, i.e. multiple dwellings on one single title? If so, could he comment on the following? We are in a unique situation. We can't escape the tax by selling our property like a rental house. There is no market to selling a whole block of flats to first home buyers. Multiple flats are solely an investment property, and no investor would touch it, not being a house. No one else will buy it. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. It was something we put into our submission on this matter because, a first-time buyer is not going to buy a block of flats. They're just not. And so it shouldn't really be part of that, because we are not in any way competing with first-time buyers for that. So we would agree with you totally that should be an excluded thing, and it should be taxable. It's designed and built to be a rental, and therefore, why increase the cost of providing it as a rental? It can only harm tenants.
Yeah. I've got one here from Kelly, and she says, why is there so little protection for landlords? Do you feel like everything's kind of stacked one way, protections for tenants and nothing for the landlords?
Oh, look, it is. It certainly is getting that way. I mean, we're in business, and so there needs to be regulations. There's absolutely no problems with that. The Residential Tenancies Act is good, but it does feel like it is being twisted too far towards the right of the tenants, and it's not good for, as I've said before, for society either. Things like the 90-day notice, getting rid of that, it hurts society. It does not build better communities because it just encourages antisocial behaviour. And any of these things which make it harder for us to provide rental property ultimately harms tenants. It harms their way of living, their lifestyle, and it just makes it more difficult for them to actually get on the property ladder. It can't be good for anyone.
Oh, absolutely not. I agree. I've had one here throughout the day which says, what has been COVID's effect on landlords?
Not too bad, actually. Naturally, everyone sort of can be affected by this. But in the first lockdown that we had, it was unknown territory. And so we actually sent out a survey every week to our members just to find out how things were going and whether things were changing. And we found that just about everyone was playing ball, really. The tenants were continuing to pay their rent. The landlords were often, if the tenant lost their job, they often gave them a rent break, so that, to help them out, basically. So I think everybody played very, very well, and there weren't too many problems. Some tenants just abandoned their property, but I guess that's going to happen. But overall, things went very, very well, and I think that's why the government have actually not introduced things as they did last time. Like, they're not stopping us from putting up rent increases, because it didn't happen last time anyway. And they've already changed the law so that we can only do it once a year anyway. So they've basically already handled that.
Yeah. Well, I unfortunately have to tell you that we've already come to time. It's incredible because I feel like we could talk all day about the rental market, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up. But thank you so much for coming on and giving your thoughts about what is happening, and quite frankly, for sticking up for people who are being vilified for wanting to actually provide accommodation to New Zealanders, because that's what it is. It shouldn't be that it's the government providing a service that people readily want to already do. So thank you so much for your time. And I have to ask if you'd be back at another time.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be great. And I just encourage anyone to watch who is a rental property owner, look up our website, nzpif.org.nz. Sorry. There's associations all around the country. Join up. I think you'll find them really good.
Yeah, well, thank you so much again for coming on tonight. And that's all for tonight's Act TV. And I cannot wait to see who David will have on board for everybody tomorrow night.